Much of what modern corporations celebrate as executive presence is a highly choreographed illusion. This occurs within strong situations, environments strictly regulated by performance reviews, compliance algorithms, and the panoptic gaze of public observation. In these spaces, ethical conduct functions as a pragmatic adaptation to external incentives rather than a reflection of internal character. This organizational architecture remains fragile. It functions only while the external scaffolding remains intact to enforce discipline. The dynamic shifts in a weak situation, an environment devoid of observation, financial consequence, or reputational peril. When performative leaders cross this threshold, the lack of external pressure causes their behavior to rapidly and predictably degrade. This forces a psychological confrontation with the unobserved self. How does the human operating system function when the audience disappears? True leadership is identified not by managing others within a system, but by maintaining internalized ethical consistency in the dark. Neoclassical economics assumes human beings are rational actors who will commit a moral violation if they face zero chance of detection. Paul Feldman's Bagel Man experiment provides an empirical counter-narrative, a massive study of white-collar honesty without oversight. Feldman delivered 8,400 bagels weekly to 140 corporate offices, leaving them in snack rooms with a simple cash basket and no surveillance. This data shows that even with no one watching, the payment rate consistently hovered between 87 and 90%, directly contradicting the rational actor projection. While this establishes a baseline for honesty, unobserved ethical behavior is not a static trait. Payment rates fluctuated based on office morale and perceived systemic unfairness. Feldman noted high theft rates among telecom executives who rationalized their actions as entitlement. Unethical decisions in the dark rarely involve a formal cost-benefit analysis. They occur because the individual finds a way to internally rationalize the act in the moment. We have to ask how easily this baseline of honesty is manipulated by the mere illusion of an audience. Researchers tested this in a university coffee room by alternating the image above a payment honesty box between a picture of flowers and a photograph of staring human eyes. The synthesized image of eyes triggered evolutionary reputation management mechanisms, significantly increasing contributions despite there being no actual oversight. This mechanism scales to a macro level, as seen in large field experiments on voter turnout conducted by Gerber, Green, and Larimer. This chart shows voter turnout. Under baseline anonymity, participation is 29.7%. Moral appeals barely increase this. Turnout increases visibly when researchers introduce simulated observation, warning that voting records will be monitored. Compliance peaks year 38% when the threat of social exposure is highest. The pattern indicates that norm-compliant behavior is driven more by the perceived presence of an audience than by internal conviction. The dictator game in behavioral economics shows that people act fairly when their decisions are transparent to others. However, when researchers introduce moral wiggle room, allowing subjects to remain ignorant of how their choices affect others, the behavior changes. Individuals choose ignorance to behave selfishly while avoiding an explicit ethical violation. They are committed to the aesthetic of morality rather than the ethical outcome. This highlights two dimensions of moral identity: symbolization and internalization. Symbolization focuses on outward signaling. These leaders champion public CSR initiatives to accrue moral credits, which they then use to license selfish behavior in private. Internalization occurs when moral traits are embedded at the core of an individual's self-concept. These leaders require no external audience to regulate their actions. Leaders relying on symbolization use public ethics as a costume to bolster a shallow sense of self, leading to a behavioral collapse when unobserved. Internalized ethics face the ultimate test when the audience is not just absent, but actively hostile. The whistleblower demonstrates the limit of this identity, acting when external compliance architectures have failed or become corrupt. During the 2014 Department of Veterans Affairs scandal, those exposing delays were 10 times more likely to receive disciplinary action than those remaining silent. True accountability functions as an emergent, internalized force that overpowers the fear of institutional retaliation. Michel Foucault's analysis of antiquity highlights a shift from modern neoliberal governance to the ancient care of the self. Classical thought required an individual to exercise mastery over themselves as a prerequisite for assuming power over others. Stoicism centers this mastery in the hegemonikon, the executive control center of the mind. The Stoic uses a Stoic knife to separate external conditions from internal choices. While an undisciplined mind sees a lack of observation as a strategic advantage, the Stoic sees it as irrelevant. Integrity resides solely in the hegemonikon. Therefore, a private ethical breach is seen as self-mutilation, regardless of whether an audience is present. Ancient Indian political philosophy provides a similar framework, contrasting the external force of danda with the internal duty of dharma. Danda represents the external rod of punishment. Indian texts warn that ruling through danda alone breeds systemic decay, whereas dharma provides an internalized ethical foundation. This is applied through swadharma, the internalization of the moral contours of a leader's specific role. The philosopher Basavana demanded antakarana shuddhi, or inner purity, arguing that leadership requires the total alignment of thought, speech, and action. Effective governance replaces the crude instrument of external punishment with the internalization of specific duty. History provides the crucible for these frameworks, testing character in environments of extreme isolation. During his imprisonment in the Tower of London, Sir Thomas More used silence as a strategic assertion that the state has no jurisdiction over the internal hegemonikon. In the Mahabharata, Yudhisthira chose systemic fairness over strategic survival while unobserved in the forest, proving that his commitment to Dharma was an immutable law of the self. N.R. Narayana Murthy applied this to modern organizational life, defining character as how an individual behaves when no one is watching. Performative executive presence is fragile and susceptible to collapse when the environment shifts to offer a dark corner where metrics cannot reach. The most critical audience a leader faces is the inescapable presence of their own conscience. When external scaffolding is removed and darkness sets in, the act of doing what is right while unobserved defines the highest form of command.